Okay, super quick update here. We've got the first chunk of foam that represents where trains first enter the railroad, enter the model portion, and head off into the east yard throat. And what I've done here is I've drilled holes for the switch points, and I used a router to cut a relief in there because those holes are huge, and which is fine. I'll want clearance for the switch throws, but I don't want scenic materials getting down in there later when I start laying down dirt and ballast. So what I'm going to do is put some reasonably thick styrene chips in there with a little slot for the switch throw action, to kind of paste over those holes and provide as much of a barrier as possible to keep the finer materials from drizzling down in there. Now, the other half of this control system involves having cut out the bottom, and so I routed that down to 3/4 of an inch, maybe just a shade less, to match the thickness of the plywood that's going to reside along the edge of this area. And I've got an idea on how I can clamp that in there. Be a combination of mechanical clamping and Gorilla Glue. So, but each one of these channels right here, see, I initially cut them the wrong direction. Switches aren't going to be throwing this way. They're going to be coming straight out from their throw. So I had to do a little extra cutting. But the idea is that I will be running a fairly hefty piece of music wire bent to an L shape underneath these, to HO scale Caboose Industries ground throws that'll be mounted on this little 3/4 inch plywood lip that's going in here. And so they can be set in place what I would like to call dry, meaning you can get your fitment and adjustment and everything like that. And then once that's set, before I bend the wires into shape, I'm going to slip a little aluminum tube sleeve that'll go right about there in each one of these things, just before the 90-degree bend, so there's something to support it. And I'll use a little bit of great stuff foam to foam those into place. The sleeve will keep the foam, it'll act as sort of a bearing. I mean, I could just put a squirt of foam in there around the wire and wiggle it loose later, but my concern is that continued action of the wire sawing through that foam will eventually make it come loose, and then you got to redo the process all over again. With those little aluminum sleeves acting as a bearing against that should hold everything into place and still make it not too unreasonable if I have to pop something out for maintenance or replace a worn out or broken linkage. But since it's a fairly thickish piece of music wire bent to an L shape, how much could it possibly break down? Ha ha. I'm sure that statement, now that that's on video, will come back to bite me in the tuchus later, but such is model railroading. The other thing I've done is I've cut a relief here in the face for a control panel. And I'll be digging this out a little bit more, I don't know, through a hot wire cutter or maybe setting my router depth a little deeper. But I'm going to make a recessed styrene box, probably with a plexiglass back end for the switch panel. And yeah, because I want to use something clear for the background so I can paint my track lines and everything on there and make that look all nice and slick. And then the box will be recessed about 3/4 of an inch to keep the switch handles themselves from sticking out into the path of the into the aisleway, so you don't have people accidentally knocking them out of there, tearing the entire panel out. The method of wiring and running the wires is going to be similar to something Ken Patterson talked about, where you take a piece of brass tubing where you're soldering your feeders and pushing it, in the case around here at the yard, pushing it down into the control panel area and feeding the wire through there while the tube is still in place. Then you can pull the tube out and the wire will be neatly trapped in its own little foam tunnel. So I'm going to be doing that. I might have to route this out just a touch bigger, because ultimately my plan is to feed the power in through 1/4-inch phone plugs in the face. So those will effectively be bus power coming into the control panel, and then the control panel will distribute that energy to each of the tracks via the feeder wires. So anyway, this section is more or less prepped up to the point that I can do it. Right now I'm getting ready to paint it a nice tan color, and that will get this section started, that I can at least, maybe, God willing, put some track down and start doing something that resembles actual model railroading. So that's what's going on around here. I also got the other kitty partition built. Just waiting for the pre-hung door unit to go in there. And you see inside the layout room here how everything is looking. All the bench work is more or less up. I still have to do the bullnose for the front yet. That'll kind of trim the front end and make it look nice, and serve as a clutch point to hold the foam modules in against the back. I've also decided I'm not doing a tall backdrop on this. I'm just going to use some of these L brackets here with some of the remaining 7/16 plywood cut into narrow strips and held up by these brackets, just as an unseen backstop for each one of the foam pieces. I might have to do a little routing and cutting, but the idea is to make sure that all the front edges look nice and clean, and the back edges will sit a little bit away from the wall. I'm not too worried about that. I'll use whatever scenic tricks I need to disguise the gap in the back. And then the backdrop itself, I'm just going to paint probably a 24-inch strip of a nice sky blue color along the wall here, just to have something other than white textured wall behind there. So that's kind of the going plan for now. And so yeah, that's where we are. Pretty pleased with how things have been going, and so everything is healing nicely, as Frank Zappa once said. So I guess that's it. 7.5 minutes is more than enough time to tell you what's going on around here, and much longer than I intended to make this. So I'm Mike Lindsay. Thanks for watching.